The NFL harbors some dark secrets. Amidst the record-breaking seasons and storied comebacks, a sinister past lurks. A past the NFL hopes is forgotten. In the 102-year history of the NFL, stories of achievement and triumph have overshadowed these stories. Stories filled with tragedy and heartbreak. These horrifying tales have been quietly ignored and overshadowed until now.
There's a man in the road. He looks dead. There's no movement.
Viewer discretion is advised. Chapter 1: Peer Pressure. In Week 4 of the 2015 season, the 3-0 New England Patriots faced off against the 2-2 Dallas Cowboys. With the Cowboys nearing the end of the Tony Romo era and going head-to-head against Tom Brady and the Gronk-led Patriots, there was no question that this game would be a blowout. And it was just that, with the Patriots winning handedly 30-6. However, the storyline that would shock the nation was yet to come. Hours after the game at approximately 8:20 p.m., police received reports of an altercation outside AT&T Stadium. As they arrived on the scene, they heard a gunshot. The crowd dispersed in panic. Amidst the fleeing bodies, they found a man in his mid-40s, mortally wounded, lying on the concrete. They quickly identified the assailant as he failed to clear a fence and was tackled to the ground. However, the most disturbing aspect of this incident would only be discovered after questioning several witnesses to the shooting. According to eyewitness accounts, a dispute had caused the fight to break out. Amidst the flying fists and grappling, one man approached the group of fighting fans, took out a pistol, and pointed it at one of the men. I quote, "I looked up, and I saw one of my buddies trying to get a girl out from under the pile. One guy walks up to him and points a gun at him. The guy let my friend go, and I grab him so he can leave. He then aims at another man. As the shooter points the gun, the surrounding crowd started urging him to shoot, and he pulled the trigger. The man later died from his injuries, and the assailant was charged with murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The alcohol-fueled brawl ended in a tragic loss of life, as a group of immature and sadistic bystanders encouraged the shooting. The power of the group, and in particular mob mentality, cannot be understated. And that's not to lessen the shooter's actions, but to highlight the fact that the shooting could have been easily avoided through the intervention of one of the bystanders rather than their instigation. A GoFundMe page was created for the victim's pregnant fiancé, where over $9,000 were donated. Chapter 2: Silence. Silence engulfed the stadium as thousands of onlookers transfixed on the field. Hearts raced as a lone player lay on the turf. Players openly wept on the sideline as Dick Butkus, legendary linebacker for the Chicago Bears, frantically waved over at the sideline as the medics rushed to the field and immediately began to perform CPR on the 28-year-old receiver, Chuck Hughes. This dark moment in NFL history cannot be fully understood without going back to the Detroit Lions' final preseason game against the Buffalo Bills. Late in the game, Chuck Hughes caught a pass and received a brutal hit to the ribs, forcing him out of the game. After the match had ended and both teams went to the locker room, Hughes collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors could not confirm what had happened and stated that it was a kidney or liver injury. After 4 days in care, he was released, but continued to experience sharp pains in his stomach and chest, but toughed through it and continued on to the season. In Week 6 of the 1971 season, the Detroit Lions faced off against the Chicago Bears. Chuck Hughes had not caught a ball all season, but in the fourth quarter, with 2 minutes left in the game, receiver Larry Walton for the Detroit Lions was forced out with an injury, and Chuck Hughes stepped in and immediately made an impact, catching a 32-yard pass from Greg Landry and is sandwiched by two defenders and is slammed to the ground, but springs back up, seemingly unfazed by the collision. As the 2 minutes continued to wind down, the Lions steadily marched the ball downfield. The Bears cornerback who lined up across Hughes in those final 2 minutes stated, "Hughes' eyes looked kinda strange," mere minutes before Hughes collapsed. After an incomplete pass to tight end Charlie Sanders in the end zone, Hughes returning to the huddle began to slow down and suddenly clutched his chest as he started to stagger and falls. As Dick Butkus stared down, had Dick Butkus finally killed a man, the crowd thought, but he was untouched. As the medics approached Hughes, they realized he was unconscious and began to perform CPR, aggressively pounding on Hughes' chest as a chilling silence filled the stadium. A stretcher was immediately brought out and carried Hughes away as his arms hung limply off the sides of the stretcher. Chuck Hughes was pronounced dead. During the autopsy, they found that he passed away from acute coronary thrombosis brought on by premature hardening of the arteries. His genetics had given him the heart of an old man. At his funeral, all 40 of his line teammates attended. His now widowed wife, Sharon Hughes, sued the hospital for failure to diagnose his fatal condition during the final game of the 1971 preseason for $21.5 million, and they settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The tragedy of Chuck Hughes and the uniqueness of his story has led to his immortalization in the football community. The Detroit Lions have retired his number and created an award in his honor, titled the Chuck Hughes Award, given to the most improved player on the roster. Chuck Hughes lives on, and rather than being remembered for his unfortunate passing, let him be remembered for his relentless work ethic and the good man he was. Chapter 3: A Dark Discovery. Week 15, 2009 season. Carson Palmer calmly approaches the line of scrimmage. The ball is going to one man, the Bengals' greatest playmaker. Palmer hikes the ball and drops back in the pocket. He launches the ball deep to Chad Ochocinco, burning one of the fastest corners in the league, Antonio Cromartie. Ochocinco hauls the ball in for a 49-yard touchdown. The usual charismatic and controversial Ochocinco, who always had a unique celebration up his sleeve, fell to his knees, lifted his head, and pointed at the sky. Just 3 days prior, one of Ochocinco's closest friends and fellow receiver, Chris Henry, had passed away. The young 26-year-old receiver had big dreams and was intent on turning his troubled life around, and was embraced by his Bengals team, which made the loss that much more tragic. In Chris Henry's final moments, a series of 911 calls were made by several witnesses. They described a man without his shirt and a cast on one of his arms in the back of a moving pickup truck as he punched the back window.
I need a police officer on Oak Road. I'm riding behind a yellow truck. It's a F-150. It's got a black man on it with no shirt on, and he's got his arm in a cast. He's got some black pants on. He's beating on the back of this truck window. Something just looks crazy.
The second call described a man lying in the road, motionless, with a crowd of people surrounding him, and as they were going to check on his pulse, the recording ends.
I'm on Oakdale Road. I just pulled up and there's a man in the road. He looks dead. There's no movement. Okay. I don't know what happened. We just pulled up here.
Can you find out if he's awake? Or
No, he's definitely unconscious. He is not awake. Well, there's somebody checking his pulse and stuff right now.
Okay. Is he breathing?
Chris Henry would be rushed to the hospital and put on life support, where he would succumb early the following morning. According to the medical examiner, Henry had died from blunt force trauma from falling out of the moving pickup truck. But why was Henry in the back of a truck with no shirt, punching the back window? According to one of Henry's next door neighbors, he saw the truck leave the driveway and said Henry was yelling that he needed to talk to the woman behind the wheel. He said, "If you take off, I'm going to jump off the truck and end it." He had jumped into the bed of the pickup as his fiancée was driving away from the residence, and at some point came out of the back of the vehicle. Henry's tragic death was felt around the league, with each team having a moment of silence before kickoff. However, the most disturbing aspect of this incident was yet to be uncovered, and this revelation would shock the nation. A year after Henry's passing, the Brain Injury Research Institute discovered that Chris Henry had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by multiple hits to the head, making him the first active NFL player to be diagnosed with CTE at the young age of 26. What is even stranger is the fact that Henry did not have a reported concussion in the entirety of his playing time at West Virginia or in the NFL. This caused a shockwave around the league. Concussions were not the only danger or cause to CTE, but the accumulation of lesser blows could eventually cause long-term brain damage. The threshold was far lower than anyone else had thought. Victims suffering from CTE can lose control of their impulses, suffer depression and memory loss, and ultimately develop dementia. What makes this even more troubling was Chris Henry's past. He had a troubled past, with frequent suspensions and run-ins with the law. His fiancée also stated that Henry frequently suffered from headaches and had mood swings. Many believe his CTE was at the root of these off-field issues. His fiancée was not charged with his death, and there was no alcohol found in Henry's system. It is still unknown whether Henry jumped out of the truck purposefully or fell accidentally. Either way, his story helped bring to light the health risks that repeated blows to the head can cause, even without a diagnosable concussion. After his passing, Henry's mother decided to donate his organs for transplant: his corneas, lungs, kidneys, and pancreas, which ultimately saved the lives of 4 people. Chapter 4: The Last Drive. As the sun beat down on the group of young football players led by their 6'5" all-state defensive tackle, Jeff Alms, the sound of clanging helmets and expletives yelled by the coaches could be heard a mile away. Amidst the banging of shoulder pads, a young player arrived, and the coach introduced him to the team, announcing that he had just transferred from a nearby high school. Giving him no time to settle in, the coach decided to put the 5'7" newcomer against the 6'5" all-state lineman. While most would tremble at the near idea of going up against someone so much bigger, the 5'7" transfer student didn't flinch, and with all his might threw himself at the 6'5" lineman. In a battle of pure grit, the short lineman caused the all-state lineman to struggle. After 30 minutes of trench warfare, Alms pulled the short lineman aside, made a deal with him that he would go light on him if he would do the same, and he agreed. A strong friendship would be formed. The all-state lineman Jeff Alms would then transfer to Notre Dame, but his friendship with short, fiery lineman Sean Lynch would only become stronger. Jeff Alms' aggressive play and relentless work ethic made him a force of nature on the football field, and was drafted to the Houston Oilers in round 2 of the 1990 NFL Draft. Alms and Lynch's friendship continued to blossom, and unlike most who when they reach a certain level of fame and wealth forget about their friends back home, Alms and Lynch continued to be inseparable. On a fateful night on December 13, 1993, Jeff Alms and Sean Lynch were on their way home from the nightclub. Lynch had come down to Houston to cheer Alms up after a leg injury that kept him sidelined. Tipsy from a night of drinking, Alms on a windy road lost control of the vehicle and crashed into an exit ramp barrier. Alms, shaken but not injured, got out of the car to find Lynch unresponsive. Alms dials 911. He's clearly frustrated and in deep despair as he struggles to string words together and is unable to pinpoint his location. As the operator tries to get the location from Alms, he puts the car phone down and walks away. We hear 3 muffled bangs and a final 4th, and nothing else is heard. Alms had grabbed a firearm from his car, shot 3 times in the air, and turned the weapon on himself. A relatively unknown story of one of the most profound and heartbreaking stories in sports history. A tale of friendship ended with a costly mistake. Alms' blood alcohol level was 0.14, which would cause blurred vision, loss of coordination, and balance, while Lynch had a blood alcohol level of 0.30%, nearly 3 times the legal limit. They also found that during the accident, Lynch was not wearing a seatbelt, while Alms was. Teammates often avoided getting in the car with Alms, as his road rage and often reckless driving made them very uncomfortable. In one such incident, Alms pointed his firearm at a motorist. While teammates also considered him to be introspective and reserved around people he did not know, his rage was often uncontrollable, especially when he had been drinking. In one such incident at a bar, Alms had been drinking and punched a man so hard he required reconstructive surgery. This story goes to show how one quick decision of deciding to drive home rather than calling a taxi or friend to pick you up can be your last. Although this statement is constantly drilled into the public mind, the statement, "Don't drink and drive," is one that many continue to ignore. Drunk driving is responsible for about 1/3 of traffic fatalities, and there's no doubt that his drunken state led to his final decision. The tragedy of Alms and Lynch's passing continues to haunt the NFL. Behind the multi-million-dollar contracts and game-winning drives, these stories lurk. Stories that the NFL hopes is forgotten.